Sabrina 90s comic issue 32. The story starts out with Sabrina playing soccer and being told she did a nice pass. Then it turns out one of her opponents is a tough girl who's literally named Big Belinda, which I have to assume is a nickname she's proud of because it goes with her being good at sports and a rough player, in spite of the fact that it draws attention to her weight. She's got no subtlety at all. When Belinda elbows Gina, fortunately reality ensues and she actually does get a penalty. I have to wonder why she isn't out of the game immediately. I hope that's not how actual soccer works. It's pretty boring to have a story where Sabrina is just playing soccer, and she just has to deal with, of course, a big bully opponent. That sounds like a really easy idea to come up with. She just has to be big and mean because she's on the opposing side to the main character. Good thing for Sabrina that there aren't any rough players like that on Sabrina's team, and that Belinda is literally the only one in the game like that, as well. After some time is wasted because Belinda goes out of her way to taunt Sabrina in particular, I forget why, Sabrina gets teased that she can't kick the ball to the goal, so she uses magic so that the ball bounces off Belinda's butt and into the goal. So Sabrina's team wins, and Hilda fortunately explains why she and Zelda weren't at the game to see it. They had jury duty in the other room. Wait, is it remotely realistic that both of them would have jury duty instead of just one of them? Then all of a sudden it turns out that Sabrina only cast a spell by accident. It's a surprise because she's not exactly against abusing her magic, especially when she loses her temper. And now all of a sudden she feels guilty about doing this and was only doing it by accident. It's actually lampshaded that she cheated and didn't look much better than Belinda, which is another pleasant surprise in the writing. I mean, if this was the first story you ever read about Sabrina, you would agree with Sabrina here. Zelda and Hilda are perfectly accepting and calm about her mistake, which is good because Sabrina already knows she made a mistake. I'm gonna miss this characterization of them. For some reason, Hilda yells at Zelda just for acknowledging that we all make mistakes, and Zelda says she's just kidding. Why is she yelling at her for being a good parent? Sabrina's told she's gonna have to play the same team again. Thankfully, Sabrina's considerate enough to be upset about Gina's sprained shoulder. She can't exactly heal it because then everyone would know that she's a witch. I mean, even if she made her forget that she healed it, there'd be a lot of people she'd have to erase the memories of, and there'd still be medical records that she had a sprained shoulder. Gina tells her to cheer up and has faith in her. Sabrina says she's meeting her Aunt Hilda on the other side of the park. Why doesn't she just warp to the other side of the park? Why does she have to meet her on the park specifically? Why doesn't she just warp Hilda to her? She would have never gotten grabbed by Belinda. It would have made more sense if the reason she went to the park was, say, to feed the pigeons or something. To walk a dog. Belinda tries to ram her into a tree. Again, no subtlety. To be fair, a bull hit her in a humiliating place because of her in front of everyone. While it is pretty unsportsmanlike that she's bothering her here, why wouldn't she hold a grudge for that? Sabrina makes herself intangible and makes Belinda run into a tree, and Belinda doesn't question how she did that. Sabrina literally said that she's making herself intangible, and Belinda doesn't freak out at the fact that she clearly revealed she's a witch. This would only make sense if Belinda was actually a witch herself, and so she's already used to witches existing. Maybe the reason she doesn't use magic is because she has the restraint to not do so because that'd be cheating, or more likely her magic was taken away from her for abusing it. What's even more confusing is that Sabrina doesn't question the fact that she isn't questioning this, and isn't realizing that Belinda has to be a witch. Instead, they just casually taunt each other like nothing ever happened. She says she'll be all over Sabrina like a cheap suit, and Sabrina says, "I'm sure you've got a closet full of those." That's a surprisingly witty response from Sabrina. Sabrina's spell phone rings, and Salem calls Hilda and advises her to double her current bet because the odds just dropped in Westbridge. Salem wakes Sabrina up early with a radio and tries to pressure her into having a power walk or using a treadmill. Sabrina's aunts really wanted to win too. It's revealed that Sabrina's been practicing kicking a soccer ball the proper way, but as she runs into the car, Salem reveals that he did zap it a little. Realistically, Belinda's actually still hurt from running into a tree. Lucky for one of the soccer players, she correctly guessed exactly what happened to her. Someone warned Sabrina to not let Belinda bug her, giving her well-meaning advice. Zelda's so eager to support Sabrina that she wants everyone to do the wave before the game started. Sabrina does a fake right go left move to make Belinda trip. This soccer stuff is really boring. Gee, I wonder if Sabrina's gonna win, because she's the main character. Surprisingly, after an unfunny Archie comedy page, the page after that is another story entirely. Well, good, because that seems more interesting than this. Even the person uploading it to the site lost interest in the story. In the second story, Della goes to Sabrina's house angrily because she just got fired because she demanded an apology from Enchantra. It sounds stupid of her, but I guess it makes sense that after all the things she got put through by her boss, eventually she gets sick of not demanding an apology and loses the ability to resist temptation. So this was inevitable. But it would have been less lazy writing if we knew exactly what caused her to demand an apology from her. She asks where Sabrina is because she'd like to talk to her. Salem apologizes and says she left for school, and Della says she remembers the address of Westbridge High School from Sabrina's report on Enchantra, even though Della never went to that high school, and says she'll get a chance to practice her teleportation skills, which you'd think she'd be using all the time anyway, so that she wouldn't need to practice. Every witch will be teleporting every single day. Della sees a huge crowd of students and goes to the office, and decides to become a secretary there. It makes it clear that she'd be great at it right away because she's good at organizing. Lucky for her, she's being considered for the job when I doubt she'd have a resume, let alone any kind of mortal education or contacts. Surprisingly, Kraft wants to go on a dinner date with her later as well. Wouldn't it be illegal for him to date his secretary though? I guess he's planning on not following that rule. I mean, he is a vice principal and not the actual principal, which is easy to forget because he acts like the actual principal to the students anyways. Maybe that's the reason he hired her, despite her not having a resume. She's pretty. Della's just glad she can use the school intercom, so she asks Sabrina to report to her. When Della insults Enchantra, this time Enchantra teleports her angrily, when the last time, when she complained about her to Salem, she didn't warp to her. Enchantra once again acts like she heard what someone said before even warping to them. That's so weird. It would have made sense if we saw the light of the portal in the panel while they were insulting Enchantra, so we could assume that she just took a while to get to them. She's mad at Della for leaving her without having all of her work done first, like her credit card payments. She was really entitled to expect her to get all her work done after she fired her. I guess Della is so used to Enchantra returning her to normal after turning to a flea or whatever, because she doesn't feel like hiring someone new, that after all of those centuries of working for her, she's lost her risk awareness around her. She forgot that she's supposed to be afraid of her. It seems uncharacteristic of her, since she's usually so meek, but it's also kind of inevitable that she'd snap after working for her for so long. She did exaggerate how mean Enchantra was when she impersonated her, so her resentment's always been implied. Sabrina tells Enchantra that turning her into a cockroach won't fix her problems, and is badass enough to keep a calm, level head after Enchantra threatens her as well, because she's just that used to her after all the time she's seen her. She negotiates a fair contract for Della's return that'll have Della be respected as a person. Enchantra puts her seal on it because she needs her back. Sabrina shakes her hand, saying that she knew she could be a fair boss. It was so predictable that the comic wouldn't even have the guts to actually have Della stay fired. She didn't even get to date Kraft and hate him. There could have been a whole story arc where she'd be working at Sabrina's school. Why introduce a plot thread of Kraft wanting to date her if you're not going to do anything with it? Enchantra could have to deal with a bad replacement for Della first and then go crawling back to her. I want to see more of Della in a brand new position. It was nice of Della to feel bad for Kraft because he still needs a secretary. The story ends with him being shocked because Repulsa of all people is Della's replacement, thanks to Enchantra. Kraft's reaction makes no sense. He'd know she's not Della. The third story is just a nonsensical lead into the comic becoming the Sabrina animated series comic. It clearly didn't need to pretend that it was going to be canon to the 90s comic, and that it's actually going to be a lead into the animated series comic, when the two have completely conflicting canon. And it's a piece of shit, where Sabrina barely uses her magic, and gets overly whiny because she thinks her friends hate her when they don't. I'll review it right before starting the 2000s comic. It just makes more sense that way, because it's not like I'm going to be going to the 2000s comic right away. I'm going to the 70s comic after this. I had to retype this issue's review as it is, and I'm pissed at the idea of having to review this story again. so I'm fine with putting it off. Long story short, it's a frustrating and boring story that gave me a horrible first impression of the 2000s comic. And it doesn't get much better from there. There's a reason the next Sabrina comic isn't going to be that one. This issue was by Mike Gallagher. It was a pretty underwhelming one to end it on. The first story was a mundane, cliche story where Sabrina challenges a stereotypically big and mean opponent in a soccer game who bothers her in the woods at one point. It's so predictable that she had to win because she's the main character. The only thing noteworthy is that Sabrina actually felt bad that she used magic to win the game at first because she only used it by accident. And the second story was about Della quitting inevitably just to go back to Enchantra anyways because Enchantra needs her and can't be bothered to waste time finding a replacement for some reason. When she hired that dragon to guard her castle in 2 seconds. So she can't be that lazy. I can only assume she just really is attached to Della. But she should have said that. It's kind of missing something without it. Instead, she just really wants Della because status quo. So Sabrina negotiates a fairer way for Della to be treated after Della goes to work at her high school for all of 2 seconds. It could have easily changed the status quo and had her stay at her high school. That could have been a good note to end the comic on. That Della got to have a better job. Somehow, even though she clearly wouldn't have a resume when she's not immortal. I kept track of all the different ways Sabrina used her magic. Heroic uses of magic that succeed and never backfire. 28. Heroic uses that backfire. 7. Selfish practical uses of magic. 32. Abuses of magic. 20. And all the times that Sabrina was smart. 32. She had a lot more times where she actually succeeded at using magic for good, and it didn't backfire than I expected. I guess because it was just so memorable that her magic backfired. It's easy to forget that most of the time, it actually doesn't.